The night was supposed to be unforgettable. Glittering lights from the city skyline painted the streets in hues of gold and silver, and the CEO's limousine cut smoothly through the traffic like a king's chariot. Inside, Elena sat with her hands folded neatly across her pregnant belly, her mind racing with unspoken fears. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive perfume, yet she felt suffocated, as though every breath was being stolen by the silence between her and the man beside her. Her husband, a man admired for his ruthless business genius, scrolled through his phone with an expression of cold detachment, as if she were invisible. She wanted to ask him something, to remind him that a child was growing inside her, that she needed reassurance, love, comfort. But when she turned to speak, his eyes flicked to hers with irritation, the kind that silenced words before they left her lips. Minutes later, everything shattered. The world erupted with a deafening explosion, the limousine jolted violently, and fire tore through the vehicle's frame like a beast unleashed. Glass cracked and metal twisted under the force, and Elena's scream pierced the night. Flames licked the windows, climbing higher and higher, and thick smoke filled the cabin, choking her lungs. She clawed at the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged as she coughed, her vision blurring, her body trembling with terror. She pounded against the tinted glass, but outside the world seemed far away, indifferent to her agony. And then came the moment that broke her heart forever. Through the growing haze, she saw her husband push open his own door, step out into the cool night air, and walk away. Not a glance back, not a hand extended to her. His suit caught the glow of the fire as he disappeared into the shadows, abandoning her as if she were nothing. The man she had trusted, the man who had vowed to protect her, left her to die in a burning cage. Inside the limousine, Elena sobbed, her hands gripping her swollen stomach. She whispered to her unborn child, promising she would not give up. But the fire raged louder, the air grew thinner, and darkness pressed against her consciousness. On the sidewalk, passers-by screamed and backed away, afraid to approach the inferno. But among them stood Daniel. A man with calloused hands, weary eyes, and the quiet determination of someone who had endured too much in life. He had been on his way home from a late shift, walking with his head down, when the explosion tore through the silence. For a moment, he froze like everyone else, his heart racing. But then he saw her, the outline of a woman pounding against the glass, her face distorted by terror, her belly swollen with life. Something inside him snapped. He couldn't look away. He remembered, even in that chaos, the day she had destroyed his life. Years ago, in a pristine glass office, she had been the one to sign his dismissal papers. She hadn't looked at him as a human being, only as a liability, someone expendable. He had begged her, told her about his daughter Lily who depended on him, but she had turned away, her voice cold as steel. That memory had haunted him through years of struggle, through nights of hunger and days of despair. And now, fate had placed her in front of him again, this time not with power, but with desperation. Daniel didn't hesitate. He charged toward the limousine, ignoring the shouts of those warning him to stay back. Heat scorched his face, flames threatened to devour his skin, but he pressed on. He shielded his mouth with his sleeve and slammed his fist against the glass again and again until blood slicked his knuckles. The crack spread like a spiderweb, and with one final desperate blow, the window shattered. Smoke poured out, stinging his eyes, making it nearly impossible to see. But through the haze, he reached in and found her. Elena's skin was hot, her breaths ragged, her body weak. She clung to him with the last of her strength, her nails digging into his arm as if he were the only thing keeping her tethered to life. He pulled her through the broken glass, cradling her against his chest. She whimpered, her head pressing against his shoulder, her tears soaking into his shirt. For a moment, the fire roared louder, as if angry to have lost its prey. Daniel staggered backward, carrying her across the pavement until they were safe. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his arms still wrapped tightly around her trembling form. She was alive. Her child was alive. He didn't know how, but they had survived the flames together. Paramedics rushed in, lifting her onto a stretcher, but Alina's hand clutched at his shirt, refusing to let go. Her lips moved, whispering something he couldn't hear, but the look in her eyes was unmistakable. It was not gratitude yet, it was fear. Fear of being left alone again. And Daniel, though his body screamed with pain, stayed at her side. He followed the ambulance, sat in the waiting room through the long night, and when she finally opened her eyes in the hospital, he was there. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air as machines beeped steadily beside her. Alina's body ached, but her heart ached more. And when her gaze landed on the man at her bedside, she froze. Recognition struck her like lightning. The rugged face, older now, lined with exhaustion, but familiar. Daniel. The man she had fired. The man whose pleas she had ignored. Her mind spun. Why was he here? Why had he risked his life for hers? Shame washed over her, heavier than the fire's smoke. She remembered his words, the desperation in his eyes that day years ago, and for the first time she truly understood the cruelty of her decision. Now, as she lay broken and vulnerable, he was the one watching over her, while the man she had married, the man she thought she loved, had left her to burn. Daniel sat silently, his hands resting on his knees, his posture weary but resolute. He didn't speak of the past. He didn't ask why. He was simply there, like a quiet guardian. Outside the room, his daughter Lily's laughter echoed down the hall, a sound so pure and innocent it cut through Alina's shame like sunlight breaking through clouds. And in that moment, as Elena listened to the laughter of a child who still believed in love and safety, tears spilled down her cheeks. She realized the truth. The man she had once destroyed was the very man who had saved her life, and perhaps the life of her child as well. Recovery was not as simple as healing burned skin or soothed lungs. Elena lay in the hospital bed for weeks, her body tethered to tubes and machines, but it was her mind that bore the heaviest weight. At night, when the ward felt quiet and only the steady hum of monitors filled the air, she would close her eyes and see fire. She would feel the suffocating smoke, the heat licking at her flesh, and, worst of all, she would see him, her husband, walking away without looking back. Those images haunted her more than the flames. They were proof that the life she had built on wealth and appearances had always been fragile, hollow. She had been nothing more than a possession, discarded when inconvenient. Yet every morning, when the sunlight spilled through the blinds, Elena woke to find someone sitting by her side. Not the husband who vowed to protect her in front of hundreds of witnesses, not the friends who once clung to her in charity galas, but Daniel. The man she had discarded years ago, whose career she had ended with a signature, was the one who refused to leave. He brought her water when she couldn't move her arm. He adjusted her pillows when the pain gnawed at her. He even read to her softly when nightmares left her trembling in the middle of the night. Sometimes Lily would join them, skipping into the room with crayons and paper. She would crawl onto Elena's bed without hesitation and chatter away, showing her messy drawings of stars, cats, and castles. Elena often found herself smiling despite the weight on her chest, tracing her fingers across the innocent lines of a child's art. The warmth of that little girl's laughter seeped into her heart like medicine she hadn't known she needed. Still, guilt lingered. Elena remembered too clearly the day she had ended Daniel's job. She remembered his pleading voice, his desperation, the way he spoke of Lily needing shoes for school. She had been blind to his humanity, seeing him only as a file, a problem to erase. That memory now burned more painfully than her injuries. Sometimes she wanted to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. How could "I'm sorry" ever be enough? Outside the hospital walls, scandal raged like wildfire. News broke of the Limousine fire, of how the CEO had left his pregnant wife behind. Photographs of the wreckage appeared on every front page, and Elena's face, tear-streaked and pale, became the symbol of betrayal and cruelty. The man who had once been admired for his empire and power now faced the world's fury. Investors fled, lawsuits piled up, and his name turned from respected to reviled. He disappeared from the public eye, leaving Elena to face the world alone. She felt stripped bare, the jewels and gowns that once defined her gone, replaced only by the raw truth of her survival. But within that pain, something unexpected bloomed. Daniel never once mentioned her past decision, never reminded her of her cruelty. He simply continued to help. He wheeled her down hospital hallways so she could feel fresh air on her face. He brought her food when she grew tired of bland meals. And when her hands shook too hard to hold a cup, he held it for her. His kindness was steady, unspoken, unselfish. For the first time in her life, Elena began to understand what love looked like, not as a possession or transaction, but as sacrifice. Months passed, and Elena's strength returned slowly. By the time her child was due, she was no longer the glamorous socialite the world had once known. She was quieter, humbler, yet stronger than she had ever been. On a rainy evening, with thunder rolling across the sky, she went into labor. Fear gripped her heart as contractions tore through her body, but Daniel was there. He held her hand, whispering words of encouragement, never letting go even when she screamed. Hours later, when the cries of a newborn filled the hospital room, Elena broke down in sobs. A baby boy, tiny and perfect, was placed in her arms. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her heart overflowed with something she had never truly felt before: pure, unconditional love. She looked up through tears and saw Daniel's face, his eyes soft, his expression filled with awe. For a moment, she wanted to tell him everything she felt, that she was grateful beyond words, that she wished she could undo the past, that his presence had saved more than her life, it had saved her soul. But the words lodged in her throat, replaced instead by tears and a quiet squeeze of his hand. Life after the birth was not easy. Elena moved into a modest home, far from the luxurious mansion she had once known. At first, the simplicity felt foreign. The walls were bare, the furniture plain, the kitchen small. But slowly, she began to see beauty in it. There was laughter at the dinner table when Lily cracked jokes. There was peace in watching the children play on the floor, their innocent giggles filling the air. There was comfort in small things: a warm cup of tea shared on a quiet evening, a walk in the park where no one recognized her, moments when she was simply herself, not the CEO's wife, not a scandalous headline, just a woman, a mother. The bond between her and Daniel grew quietly, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was built on gratitude and necessity. But over time, it deepened into something richer. She noticed the way he always put others before himself, the way he worked tirelessly yet never complained, the way he listened, truly listened, when she spoke. In his presence, she felt safe in a way she never had before. He didn't see her as a trophy or a burden. He saw her as a person, flawed but worthy of care. And she, in turn, began to see him not as the man she once wronged, but as the man who had saved her. The man who had shown her what resilience looked like. The man who had taught his daughter to laugh even through hardship. Slowly, feelings she had thought dead inside her began to stir: hope, admiration, affection. Years passed, and the scars of their pasts never disappeared, but they no longer defined them. Elena raised her son with love, Daniel raised Lily with pride, and together they created a family bound not by perfection, but by survival, forgiveness, and second chances. One evening, as the children played in the yard chasing fireflies, Elena stood beside Daniel on the porch. She looked at him, her heart swelling with unspoken emotion. The flames of the limousine, the betrayal of her husband, the shame of her past, they all seemed distant now, like shadows from another life. What remained was this moment, this man, this family. She realized she had been given not just a second chance at life, but a second chance at love. And in that moment, as the laughter of children filled the twilight air, Elena finally allowed herself to believe that broken things could be made whole again.